The birth of Uber. A cold night. A billion-dollar idea. It all began on a freezing winter night in Paris, 2008. Two friends, Havit Kenich and Garrett Cam, stood shivering on a street corner, waiting endlessly for a taxi that never seemed to come. The cold pierced through their jackets, but it was the frustration of waiting that hit even harder. From that very moment of discomfort, a revolutionary idea sparked, a concept that would grow into a global empire worth billions. Yet, Uber's rise to the top wasn't smooth. The road was paved with legal battles, controversies, and fierce opposition. But before we get to that, let's rewind to the early life of Travis Kalanick, the man behind the empire. Travis didn't have an easy childhood. He was bullied, and school felt more like a battlefield than a place of learning. But he found solace in something unexpected: work. Even as a teenager, he showed a knack for entrepreneurship, starting his hustle by delivering kitchen goods door to door and mastering the art of persuasion through cold calls. His first major venture was Scour, a peer-to-peer file-sharing platform similar to Napster. Unfortunately, success was short-lived. Scour got hit with a massive lawsuit for copyright infringement, with damages totaling a staggering $250 million. The company had no choice but to file for bankruptcy. But Travis wasn't the kind to give up. He came back stronger with RW, another peer-to-peer tech business. This time he did something remarkable. He turned the very companies that had sued him into clients. It was a brilliant move that showcased his resilience and strategic mind. When RW was eventually sold for millions, it gave Travis the financial stability to chase an even bigger dream: Uber. The idea for Uber wasn't born in a boardroom. It came from a James Bond movie scene where Bond tracked a car using his mobile phone. Inspired by the scene, Travis and Garrett saw an opportunity to revolutionize transportation by applying real-time GPS technology to solve the headaches of traditional taxi services. In 2010, they launched UberCab in San Francisco. It wasn't just another ride service, it was a premium experience. With just a tap on their phone, users could summon a sleek black car to their location and watch its arrival in real time. No more endless waiting or frustrating phone calls. The cars were luxurious, the drivers professional, and the rides seamless. Even payment was automated. No cash, no awkward tipping, just a smooth, modern experience. Uber quickly became a status symbol in San Francisco, especially among tech enthusiasts and business elites. But as the company's success grew, so did the challenges. Regulatory hurdles, protests from taxi unions, and ethical controversies soon followed. Still, the vision of a hassle-free, on-demand transportation service continued to resonate with millions, making Uber one of the most transformative startups of the 21st century. Today, Uber is more than just a ride-hailing app. It's a symbol of how a simple idea born out of frustration can disrupt entire industries, reshape urban mobility, and change how the world moves, one ride at a time. Uber's legal battles, from defiance to global disruption. October 20th, 2010, a date that shook Uber to its core. The newly founded company, then called UberCab, received an unexpected visit from transportation authorities. The message was clear: their operations were illegal. Despite using fully licensed professional drivers, UberCab's business model clashed with strict taxi regulations. The core issue? Uber didn't own any vehicles. Instead, they partnered with drivers who used their own cars, a cost-saving approach that sparked legal trouble. The company faced fines of up to $5,000 for each unauthorized ride, every single day. Worse still, most of the Uber team, barely in their 20s, were threatened with up to 90 days in jail for daily violations. While fear rippled through the team, one man remained unfazed: Travis Kalanick. With a mix of boldness and near arrogance, he declared they wouldn't back down. His solution? Drop the word cab from the name, and just like that, Uber was born. But the name change wasn't the only trick up Travis's sleeve. He had a unique way of interpreting the law, claiming Uber was a tech platform, not a taxi company. This distinction was critical. It allowed Uber to sidestep traditional transportation regulations and save billions in compliance costs. One of Travis's boldest moves was redefining Uber drivers as partners rather than employees. This maneuver meant Uber wasn't obligated to provide benefits or labor protections, a controversial stance that sparked heated debates. Understanding that clashes with authorities were inevitable, Travis prepared for battle. His strategy? Grow fast, win public favor, and make Uber indispensable before regulators could shut it down. Speed was the key. To accelerate growth, Uber partnered with AT&T to purchase thousands of iPhones at a discount, handing them out to drivers with the Uber app pre-installed. They also introduced generous driver incentives, rewarding those who completed a set number of rides each week. On the rider side, Uber launched irresistible promotions. First rides were completely free, followed by heavily discounted trips. While these offers drained Uber's funds, they were a calculated investment to hook customers. Travis believed that once people experienced the convenience and luxury of Uber, they'd be willing to pay full price. And he was right. As user numbers soared, Uber replicated its strategy in city after city, offering enticing promotions and referral bonuses to expand its driver network. But with growth came scrutiny. Regulators in various cities began questioning the legality of Uber's operations. In response, Uber deployed a clever tactic. They weaponized their user base. Whenever local authorities threatened a crackdown, Uber sent out alerts through their app, urging users to take action. With just a tap, riders could sign petitions or send pre-written emails to government officials. The result? Officials were bombarded with thousands of emails supporting Uber, creating a wave of public pressure that was hard to ignore. But Uber didn't stop at digital activism. They organized protests in front of city halls. In New York, when turnout was underwhelming, Uber took a controversial step. They paid their own employees to swell the crowd, creating the illusion of mass support. Despite these tactics, Travis Kalanick insisted that Uber was doing nothing wrong. He portrayed the traditional taxi industry as corrupt, accusing taxi companies of bribing politicians to maintain their monopoly. Uber's journey from a defiant startup to a global disruptor wasn't just about technology, it was a battle of narratives. And for Travis, the message was clear. Change was inevitable, and Uber would be the one to drive it forward. Uber's controversial tactics, the rise of a transportation giant. For Travis Kalanick, playing by the rules was never an option. He believed that applying for permits the traditional way was a dead-end street, riddled with bureaucracy that would crush innovation. In his mind, Uber's services benefited both drivers and passengers, and if following the law meant halting progress, he'd simply ignore the law altogether. In 2012, Uber took a daring leap by launching UberX, a service that allowed nearly anyone with a car to become a driver. It was a game changer, but it also marked the beginning of an intense legal battle with regulators. Unlike traditional taxi services, UberX drivers weren't subject to the same licensing requirements, which opened a Pandora's box of regulatory challenges. City officials, frustrated by Uber's non-cooperation, began targeting the drivers directly. Authorities threatened hefty fines, impounded vehicles, and even towed cars on the spot if they suspected someone was driving for Uber. Their goal? Deter people from using the app and curb Uber's explosive growth. Despite mounting pressure, Uber wasn't backing down. In fact, the company doubled down. With public support growing, Uber began to flex its influence. They lobbied for legislative changes, pushing to redefine employment laws to classify drivers as independent contractors, thus avoiding costly benefits and protections. However, the controversies never ceased. Even today, some cities continue to ban Uber's operations. But Uber's most controversial tactic? A secret tool called Greyball. Authorities were catching on. They downloaded the Uber app to track rides and catch drivers in the act. To counter this, Uber developed Greyball, a sophisticated system designed to hide its operations from government officials and law enforcement. Think of it as a digital camouflage. When a suspected government account logged into the app, Greyball would show them a fake version of Uber's map. Cars would mysteriously disappear, and attempts to book a ride would result in a message saying no drivers were available. Meanwhile, regular users would see plenty of cars in the area and could book rides without issue. How did Uber identify these accounts? Greyball's algorithms analyzed various data points. First, location. If someone frequently opened the app near government buildings like police stations or courthouses, their account was flagged. Next, Uber cross-referenced personal details, including credit card information and social media profiles, to verify whether the user had connections to regulatory agencies. Even more impressively, Uber hired former intelligence agents from agencies like the CIA and NSA to refine Greyball's capabilities, essentially building their own internal spy network. The system worked. Numerous attempts by officials to bust Uber drivers ended in failure. They would stare at their screens, unaware that the cars they were seeing weren't real. Every ride request they made was quietly blocked, ensuring that drivers stayed out of trouble. For years, Greyball remained a well-guarded secret, but in 2017, an investigation exposed Uber's clandestine tactics. The revelation sparked outrage. Critics accused the company of embodying a move fast, break things mentality, driven by greed and a sense of untouchability. Even so, by the time Greyball was uncovered, Uber had already established itself in most major cities. The service had become too popular, too ingrained in daily life to be easily shut down. Alongside Greyball, Uber invested heavily in lobbying efforts to legalize their operations. They understood that once public support reached a critical mass, regulatory resistance would crumble under the weight of popular demand. Ultimately, Uber's aggressive tactics, both in technology and politics, allowed the company to survive, thrive, and reshape the future of transportation. But the question remains: was it innovation, or was it manipulation? The dark side of Uber's rise. A ruthless war with Lyft. For Travis Kalanick, competition wasn't just a challenge, it was a battle for domination. From the very start, he believed there could only be one winner in the ride-sharing space. And when a new player, Lyft, entered the scene in 2012, it marked the beginning of a brutal rivalry that would redefine the industry. The spark that ignited the conflict came unexpectedly. One morning, Travis received a call from none other than Mark Zuckerberg. The Facebook founder mentioned that his employees were raving about a new ride-sharing app called Lyft. For Travis, this wasn't just news. It was a call to arms. Although Uber launched first, it initially focused on premium black car services. Lyft, on the other hand, introduced a cheaper, friendlier model that allowed everyday people to become drivers. Seeing Lyft's potential to disrupt the market, Uber quickly pivoted to launch UberX, a budget-friendly service open to anyone with a car. The stage was set for a fierce competition. But this wasn't a fair fight. For Travis, there were no boundaries. He would use any means necessary, ethical or not, to crush his rival. Lyft's approach to recruiting drivers was community-driven. They hosted lively events with food, games, and giveaways to attract potential drivers. But Uber saw these gatherings as an opportunity for sabotage. They sent teams to crash Lyft's events, offering better promo codes and signing bonuses on the spot to lure drivers away. Lyft's carefully planned parties often ended with more drivers walking out as Uber recruits than new Lyft drivers. Lyft's signature branding, a giant pink mustache on cars, became a cultural icon. But Uber responded with aggressive ad campaigns, plastering cities with billboards urging riders and drivers to ditch Lyft and switch to Uber. However, things took a darker turn when Uber launched a secret program called Hell, a direct counter to their internal driver tracking tool, Heaven. Hell was a covert system that monitored Lyft drivers in real time. Uber created fake Lyft accounts to track the location of Lyft drivers and gathered data on who was driving for both platforms. Armed with this information, Uber offered these drivers special bonuses and incentives to prioritize Uber rides over Lyft. The goal was clear: make drivers believe Uber paid more, leading them to abandon Lyft altogether. Once Lyft lost its driver base, Uber could scale back the bonuses, leaving those drivers locked into a system that wasn't as lucrative as it had seemed. But Uber's tactics didn't stop there. The company also targeted Lyft's ride requests. Using burner phones, Uber employees flooded the Lyft app with fake ride requests, only to cancel them at the last minute. This caused chaos for Lyft drivers, wasting their time and frustrating potential passengers. When these tactics came to light, the public backlash was severe. Lyft accused Uber of unethical practices, and media outlets condemned the company's cutthroat approach. Yet, Travis Kalanick showed no signs of regret. In fact, he seemed to relish the fight. He even took to Twitter to mock Lyft's co-founder, turning the rivalry into a public spectacle. One of Uber's most cunning moves, however, was behind the scenes, sabotaging Lyft's fundraising efforts. Whenever Lyft scheduled meetings with potential investors, Travis would reach out to those same investors, hinting that Uber was also preparing to raise funds. Since investors typically avoid putting money into two direct competitors, they often chose Uber over Lyft. Travis's charisma played a key role in securing these investments. He painted a grand vision for Uber, not just as a ride-sharing company, but as a global logistics powerhouse capable of delivering people, packages, and even meals. He envisioned Uber as a rival to Amazon itself. His strategy was brilliant. He'd build excitement during pitch meetings, then go radio silent for weeks, creating a sense of scarcity. The result? Investors became even more eager to buy in, fearing they'd miss out on a revolutionary opportunity. These tactics paid off. Uber secured massive funding, including a $300 million investment from Google Ventures, solidifying its dominance in the market. But the question remains, did Uber succeed because of innovation or manipulation? As the ride-sharing wars continued, Uber's aggressive approach raised ethical concerns. Yet one thing was certain. In Travis Kalanick's world, business was a battlefield, and he had no intention of losing. Uber's dark secrets, scandals, tragedies, and the fall of a tech hero. With billions in funding, Uber was unstoppable. The company aggressively expanded into new markets and launched bold marketing campaigns that dazzled the public. But behind the glamorous image of innovation lay a darker story, one of exploitation, tragedy, and controversy. One particularly heartbreaking case was that of Do Shifter, a driver who shared his despair in a viral Facebook post. When I first started driving, I worked 40 to 50 hours a week. Now, I'm forced to work 120 hours just to make ends meet. I am not a slave, and I refuse to live like one. In a final act of desperation, Do drove to City Hall and took his own life with a gunshot. His tragedy wasn't an isolated incident. In India, another Uber driver, crushed under the weight of car loan debts, also took his own life. His death sparked outrage among fellow drivers, who marched his body to Uber's local office, chanting, "If Uber paid us fairly, he wouldn't have died." Despite these incidents, Uber's founder Travis Kalanick held a different perspective. For him, Uber was a win-win system, a way for drivers to earn extra income while providing passengers with affordable, convenient rides. But the reality wasn't so simple. While drivers appeared to earn more, their take-home pay was quickly eroded by rising expenses, fuel, taxes, and car maintenance. Many found themselves making less than minimum wage. Worse still, Uber drivers had no job security or benefits, unlike their counterparts in traditional taxi companies. Uber's open-door policy, allowing almost anyone with a car to become a driver, raised serious safety concerns, and the traditional taxi industry wasn't going down without a fight. Taxi drivers across the globe staged massive protests, bringing cities to a standstill. In some countries, the conflict turned violent. In Mexico, reports emerged of Uber drivers being attacked, and in some cases, murdered. Many suspected that local taxi drivers were behind the killings. The battle between Uber and the traditional taxi industry wasn't just about ride-sharing. It was a brutal fight for survival. But Uber's darkest moment came in 2014 with a horrifying incident that shook public trust. A 26-year-old woman in India booked an Uber to take her home late at night. Exhausted from work, she fell asleep in the back seat. Her driver, seeing an opportunity, turned off his phone to avoid being tracked, changed the route, and drove her to a secluded area. There, he assaulted her. Before leaving, he threatened to kill her if she reported the crime. Thankfully, the woman managed to take a photo of his license plate, leading to his arrest. The incident sparked global outrage, with many condemning Uber's lax security policies. Some countries responded by temporarily banning the service altogether. While Uber argued that such incidents were rare and inevitable given the volume of rides, critics pointed to one glaring issue. Uber had lowered the bar for driver qualifications, putting passengers at risk. Despite numerous reports of sexual assaults, Uber failed to take decisive action to improve safety measures. Disturbingly, insiders revealed that at Uber's headquarters, staff would celebrate when sexual assault victims chose not to press charges or when police investigations hit a dead end. What began as a revolutionary transportation service was now tainted by scandal after scandal. Uber's downfall wasn't just about the actions of rogue drivers. It was the company's own tactics that drew widespread condemnation. Shady business practices, Greyball, and more. One of Uber's most controversial tools was Greyball, a secret program designed to evade government scrutiny. Greyball worked by identifying users who were likely regulators or law enforcement officers. When these users opened the app, they were shown a fake map with no available cars, making it impossible for them to book a ride. Greyball operated like a digital camouflage, preventing authorities from catching Uber drivers operating illegally. But that wasn't the only shady practice. Uber also stood accused of bribing officials in countries like Indonesia, using fake receipts to cover their tracks. Then came the data privacy scandal. Travis Kalanick allegedly authorized the tracking of users, even after they had ended their trips. Reports surfaced that Uber accessed the location data of high-profile individuals, including celebrities. In one case, Uber paid hackers $100,000 to cover up a massive data breach that exposed the personal information of 57 million customers. The fallout from these scandals was immense. Uber faced lawsuits, government fines, and public backlash. In one case, the company paid $28.5 million to settle a lawsuit accusing them of falsely advertising their background checks as the safest in the industry. Despite the growing list of controversies, Uber continued to operate. Investors poured billions into the company, drawn by Travis Kalanick's ambitious vision. He painted Uber as more than a ride-sharing service. It was a logistics giant capable of delivering anything, anywhere, rivaling Amazon. But with each new scandal, the public's perception of Uber shifted. What once seemed like a tech hero disrupting an outdated industry now looked more like a company willing to cross any line to win. Uber's story is a cautionary tale, a reminder that innovation without accountability can lead to disastrous consequences. The question remains: was Uber's success worth the cost? Uber's collapse from glory. The fall of Travis Kalanick. In early 2017, Uber faced one of its biggest PR disasters, a crisis that sent shockwaves through the tech world. It began with a protest against President Trump's travel ban targeting citizens from Muslim-majority countries. While taxi drivers in New York went on strike in solidarity with those affected, Uber made a bold but controversial move. Instead of supporting the strike, they continued offering rides to passengers stranded at airports. The decision was seen as opportunistic, a move to profit from political unrest. Outrage spread like wildfire, and the hashtag #DeleteUber exploded on Twitter. In just days, more than 500,000 users deleted their accounts, with even more simply uninstalling the app. For Lyft, Uber's longtime rival, this was a golden opportunity. Lyft capitalized on the backlash, winning back users who had grown disillusioned with Uber. The crisis marked a turning point for Uber's public image. Despite the company's rapid growth and market expansion, trust had been shattered, and things were about to get worse. Uber's China disaster, a costly lesson in fraud. Travis Kalanick had big dreams of conquering the Chinese market, a country with over 1.4 billion potential customers. Uber poured billions of dollars into promotions and driver incentives, hoping to replicate their success in other cities. But what worked in the US didn't work in China. Scammers quickly found loopholes in Uber's system. They bought cheap smartphones, creating fake driver accounts on one batch of phones, and fake rider accounts on another. Then they would book rides with their fake passenger accounts and accept them with their fake driver accounts, all without ever leaving the car. These fraudsters took full advantage of Uber's promotions, earning double payouts, one for the ride and another for driver bonuses. Uber hemorrhaged millions of dollars due to these phantom rides. The problem worsened when Apple updated its privacy policies, preventing apps from tracking a phone's unique identifier, the IMEI number. This made it easier for scammers to delete Uber's app, create new accounts, and continue exploiting promotions. Desperate to curb the fraud, Uber secretly modified its app to bypass Apple's security protocols, a move that violated Apple's terms of service. But they couldn't hide it forever. Apple's CEO, Tim Cook, discovered the violation. In a tense meeting, Cook gave Kalanick an ultimatum: either remove the tracking code or face being kicked off the App Store. For Uber, losing access to the App Store would have been catastrophic. Kalanick reluctantly complied, but the incident exposed Uber's win-at-all-costs culture, a culture where breaking the rules was part of the strategy. Didi versus Uber. The battle for China. Even without the fraud scandals, Uber faced a formidable rival in China, Didi Chuxing. Backed by the Chinese government, Didi wasn't just competing with Uber on promotions. They fought dirty. Didi reportedly paid traditional taxi companies to protest against Uber, sent fake text messages to Uber drivers, and even planted spies inside Uber's offices to gather intelligence. Ironically, these were tactics Uber itself had used during its early days in the US. Now, in China, Uber found itself on the receiving end of such schemes. After losing billions of dollars in a brutal battle with Didi, Uber finally waved the white flag. They agreed to pull out of the Chinese market in exchange for a 17.7% stake in Didi. While investors saw the move as a smart financial decision, Kalanick took it personally. For him, retreating from China felt like a personal failure. The loss deepened his paranoia. He became convinced that the entire world was against him, and against Uber. The viral meltdown, Kalanick's downfall. Uber's problems weren't just external. Internally, the company was struggling to deal with growing dissatisfaction among its drivers. The tension reached a boiling point in early 2017 when a video of Kalanick arguing with a driver went viral. The driver complained about Uber's declining rates, saying it was impossible to make a living. Instead of showing empathy, Kalanick snapped, saying, "Some people don't like to take responsibility for their own problems." The backlash was immediate. The video painted Kalanick as out of touch, a billionaire CEO who couldn't understand the struggles of the very people who helped build his company. The betrayal. Uber's shift to self-driving cars. While Kalanick was dealing with public backlash, his co-founder Garrett Camp announced a new initiative: self-driving cars. For Uber's drivers, this felt like a betrayal. The company they had helped build was now investing in technology to make them obsolete. But for Uber, self-driving cars were a necessity. Competitors like Google were already making strides in autonomous vehicles, and Uber couldn't afford to be left behind. However, Uber's aggressive push into self-driving technology led to yet another lawsuit. Google accused Uber of stealing trade secrets through a former employee who had joined Uber's self-driving division. A toxic culture exposed. But Uber's biggest crisis came from within. In 2017, former employee Susan Fowler published a bombshell blog post exposing Uber's toxic culture. She detailed instances of sexual harassment, gender discrimination, and a boys' club atmosphere that permeated the company. Fowler revealed that HR had repeatedly ignored complaints, prioritizing high-performing employees over ethics. Her revelations sparked a massive outcry. More employees came forward with similar stories, and Uber launched an independent investigation into its culture. The findings were damning. The report listed hundreds of instances of misconduct, ranging from physical violence to sexual assault. During an all-hands meeting to discuss the report, Uber's board promised to address gender discrimination. But the meeting itself turned into a PR disaster when a male board member made a sexist joke about women in leadership roles. The comment was leaked to the media, further damaging Uber's reputation. The end of Travis Kalanick's reign. The scandals piled up. From data breaches to regulatory violations, Uber found itself embroiled in one controversy after another. The pressure on Kalanick became unbearable. In June 2017, tragedy struck Kalanick personally. His parents were involved in a boating accident that took his mother's life. Overwhelmed by grief and mounting criticism, Kalanick took a leave of absence from Uber. But just a month later, Uber's board forced him to resign as CEO. For Kalanick, it was a crushing blow. He had built Uber from the ground up, turning it into a global empire. But in the end, his own leadership style and relentless pursuit of growth had brought the company to its knees. The legacy of Uber. Today, under new leadership, Uber is working to rebuild its image. They've implemented new policies to improve driver relations and strengthen passenger safety. But challenges remain. The company still faces lawsuits, regulatory scrutiny, and fierce competition. Uber's IPO in May 2019 fell flat, with shares dropping on their first day of trading. Despite its struggles, Uber remains a household name, a symbol of both innovation and controversy. But the question remains, can Uber thrive without the man who built it? Only time will tell. Thanks for watching. Your support means everything to us. If you found this video insightful, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to help us bring more stories like this to life. Stay tuned, and we'll see you in the next one.